Alright, very briefly, this looked at Caesar and Cleopatra. Did a quick playing of it. Yes, I got some things wrong, but I also think I got a pretty good feel for the type of game it is and how it plays. And it ain't my cup. I'll put it that way. It's not a bad game. I think I'd enjoy it. I think I'd sit down and play it with someone, probably run through 4 or 5 games of it, and then it would get put away and probably not come out very often. You know, it would be a matter of it comes in a box and it's got kind of complex setup. Not terribly, but you gotta sort the cards and everything. For a game which plays out and it's got some interesting decisions, there's no question about that. But I have to compare it to other card games, I guess, because it's not really fair to compare it to a real board game. Among other things, the fact that it does come in a box, that you can't just pack it up in a deck or whatever, makes it more of a, here, this is going to be at home game, or something that you have to pack in a bag and bring with you. Immediately, that makes it much, much less valuable to me than, say, whatever this is that comes in a deck. Okay, sure, they probably can sell it for more because it's in a nice box, and it looks like, you know, this is fancy. I also felt a little cheated when I read the description anywhere. It doesn't sound like it's just a fast-playing, quick card game. I think it's fine as one. I felt like I was buying something else. I wouldn't have even put a dollar bid or whatever I got it for, knowing that I had to pay shipping that ran, $5 or $6 for something like this that I'm really not going to get a lot of play out of. Compared to other 2-player card games, let's look at some of the classics. Compared to Rummy, I don't know if this really gives more critical decision making, and there isn't a lot else to the game beyond that. It's more complex where the decisions are going to be made, but I don't know the decisions themselves are more critical. Compared to something like Cribbage, well, there's a lot less luck in this. This is much more controlled. You can, especially when you stack the deck. Compared to Strategic War, again, there's a lot more interesting choices, etc. here. And then I start thinking, well, what about compared to other card games that I've seen that, I bought? And in those cases, I start looking at things, and I'm sure San Juan is more along these lines. I think of something like the Settlers card game, which isn't really a card game at all. I mean, I'm rotating these pieces and I'm producing and I've got this, that, and the other going on. And I feel like I've got all kinds of stuff going on. It's not, this feels more like a Rummy type of game, actually. Even though the mechanics are totally different, it feels very, very simple, and it feels like it could have come in a deck like this. In fact, it could have. If it weren't for the long cards, which are kind of classy looking and everything, but in the end, I've got a deck of cards that are kind of interesting. So it's very different from that. Compared to Magic, the Gathering, well, I mean, the amount of decision-making you have once you have a significant amount of cards in Magic as to what you're going to build for a deck and everything. It's just so different. Of course, this is a lot cheaper. But then also, I can build a few decks with Magic and put them in my pocket and play them anywhere as well, which is kind of nice. I feel like the play in Magic is much, much more in-depth and more like the Settlers card game in terms of not being sort of a classic card game where you don't have a lot. So, for me, I look at this and I say, if this were like a set of rules to play with a regular card deck, I would think, wow, somebody's really clever to have come up with that. But instead I feel like, wow, somebody really gypped people to put this in a box and sell it for, I don't know how much money, but I would guess that these things go for at least $10, no? No? And, you know, it's an interesting game. I can't say that it's bad. I can say it's clever. I can say if you sat down and played it, you'd probably have a good time playing it. But if I sit down and play a game of Rummy, I have a good time playing it. So I don't know why I need to buy, even though it's a different mechanism and etc., something that doesn't really tie in terribly well with the theme. I mean, you know, they could be normal cards as far as I'm concerned. Yes, the action events, you know, but there's games like Assassin and that's the only one that I can think of right off the bat that have special action cards just to find on your regular cards. So yeah, I mean, I can't really recommend that you pick this up unless you see it used cheap and fairly cheap. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's an enjoyable game. I just don't think that it qualifies for having been released as something professional. It would make a great print and play, perhaps, although you wouldn't have the same quality cards. It would be not terribly uninteresting to take a couple of decks of cards, of normal cards, and maybe define things based on them. With maybe like some kind of odd deck, like an old maid deck or something, to be the characters, or just chips for the character. I mean, the things you're fighting over don't matter, really, right? It's really what you have. It's the action events, which could be your face cards or whatever, and then the point value cards, which could run higher. There's not a lot more to it. I mean, you really didn't need to produce something and take money for it, no matter how clever you are. And that's one of my problems with card games, is, I don't know. So if I compare it to Chrononauts is simple, fast playing, but it doesn't feel like I'm playing a card game at all. It feels like I'm playing something that has a board. And maybe I just don't like the idea of prepackaged card games. Maybe, you know, I think it was cheap for people to put out a deck of cards and say, hey, it's old made, something you could play anyway with a regular deck. This is a little bit more than that, but it's not enough for me to justify it as something that's a standalone sell in a box game. Some people may disagree. Some people may really, really like different mechanisms of card games and want to try this. And you know, I'd say this is pretty good for something that somebody developed out of, you know, for that level of play. See what it's like compared to some of the others, because I have some other little boxed card game type things. This looks more like a Sun 1 type thing that I picked up, where you're actually, there's little pieces and everything. This one, yeah, this one's got little counters, but the cards don't really look like normal cards. They look more like an Uno type game, and that would be a good comparison. What's it like compared to Uno? I don't know. Anyway, I don't think that Caesar and Cleopatra can be compared to Uno, because it is a two-player game. It is a strategy game, primarily. And it's got some interesting concepts.